So this is the final product of today's exercise. We're going to make our view scrollable. Right? We'll have some predefined data in here. We're going to choose a flight. For example, we can edit that flight. Like I could just add a character to each of them. Right? Maybe change the aircraft here. And then just hit update. You'll see flight updated successfully. Hit close, and then if you scroll again, you'll see that changes were made. If I decide to delete, I can delete, and you'll see that that flight was removed. And of course, if we add something new, right, we can actually add something as well, and that'll actually work too. Users we won't touch in this exercise. We'll just do flights for today. And so from there, that should be enough for today's exercise. So what we're going to do is we'll start with the starter project. Starter project is basically, it's already set up with a navigation view and the flight and a user's page. So we'll just load it up and show you what's there. Flight. All right. So now, this is what we have to start off with, right? We have some command buttons here for 2 pages. Okay. So the first thing we have to do is we have to install a couple of packages if they're not already there. So what we're going to do is we're going to right-click on our project name. And we're going to go to Manage NuGet Packages. So if you right-click on your project name and go to Manage NuGet Packages, this window pops up.
The one that we the starter one, right?
Yeah. Or it should just be called W10 exercise. Just the zip file was called starter project.
Yeah.
So go to NuGet Packages. So this window pops up, and this shows you what's installed. We'll click over to Browse. I already have it installed. I should have it installed, unless I have to do it for every single project I open. But first thing we'll do is we'll search for SQL. Maybe SQL. There it is. Actually, system.data.sql client. Sorry, the mouse over. This is the one we want. All right. And so we're going to hit install. Looks like I have to install it every single time. That's surprising. Yeah, that's fine.
So system.data SQL.
Yes, not the Microsoft.data one, the system.data. Yeah, so we need this one first. It says finished for me over here. And then we need one more package. So I'm going to replace my search, still inside Browse, with DataGrid. And that's not it. There it is. Actually, Microsoft.toolkit.uwp.ui.controls.datagrid. That's the one I want.
So that's what I do.
Yeah, that we need that one too. Alright, accept the license, let it do its thing. Alright, so I have everything installed. So let's start by designing our flight view XAML file. So I'm going to close my NuGet window. I don't need it anymore. And I'm going to get rid of this output window. I'm going to switch the code to be above. We'll be doing more coding than dragging and dropping today. So we have here our grid, we have our command bar with add, edit, and delete. Let's rename first of all from crew to flight for the 3 buttons, because it's not the flight, it's a flight page actually. Right, so the app bar buttons look good. We can even add one more for refresh. Since we're here, let's add another one. So we'll say app bar button, x:name equals btn flight refresh. Say icon equals, it's either refresh, there it is. And label equals refresh. Right, so we'll actually have 4 buttons. So we'll have 4 buttons there in our preview window. Let's scroll up. Actually, before we scroll up, we're going to include
your add button, the main.
Oh, right, W. Yeah, thank you. There we go. So we brought in the data grid view into our project. We have to include it here so that it'll actually know what it is. So inside the page declaration, we're going to say XMLNS controls equals using Microsoft dot toolkit. Actually, the second one there. Microsoft.toolkit.uwp.ui.controls. So that'll allow us to bring in the data grid. Yeah, it gets deeper and deeper and deeper, doesn't it? All right, now we have enough to start building out the rest of the page.
Why is the tag assigned to the grid on the page?
I see what you're saying. So the grid tag will flight to, you're right, that's a little mistake there. Let's fix that. Surprised. Just going to take that out of there. Just going to move it into the page. Good catch. You know, I might have been hitting undo, and it just moved it for some weird reason. Yeah, you're right. I'm just going to have a quick look at users view, see if we ran into that issue. Yeah, I did the exact same thing. Grid, users view. So let's fix that. Just move that above into the page definition. So yeah, do the exact same thing on the users page as well. Move that grid tag. Move that grid tag up here. So it was in grid, move it up to page. So hit save. Move back here, hit save as we go. Now let's continue on with. So we have a text block that just has our title, it has flights. Below the text block, I mean, we could probably put it inside it. We could probably move this inside what we're going to do. But first thing is we want to make this page scrollable. So we're going to put a stack view in, but the stack view is very static. And as we add more and more rows to our grid view, things are going to get cut off and we can't do anything with it. So we'll start with a scroll view. We'll say vertical scroll bar space. Scroll bar visibility. You could say auto. I like to make it visible. I want to force it visible because it's going to really grow. And I've already played with these numbers, so I'll make it easy on you guys. Maybe actually I should. I mean, just in case if your screen res is different, maybe this won't work as well. But I'm going to say margin equals 0, 75, and then 50, 50. So just save us time. That's what we're working with. And so you can see the margins. So 75 from the edge. Sorry, 50 from the edge, 50 from the bottom. Just give a little bit of a gap. And you could even, if you really wanted to, you could actually put a 50 at the beginning of it too, if you really wanted to. keep it within there. Totally up to you. So everything's inside a scroll viewer. Now we can put our stack panel in. So we'll say stack panel, and we'll say margin. I've hard coded these already, so we'll say 75 down, because what happens is it's going to overlap the word flight, and then 120 across, and then 0, 0, because those edges are already maintained by the scroll viewer. It's like 120 might be too big. Maybe I'll just reduce it down to 75. Looking at the guide bars here, maybe even lower. 50, 25. Yeah, 25 looks better. In fact, the 75 looks good over too, so I'm going to drop that. Yeah. So I'm looking at my box and it looks much better. All right. So now, let's start by defining a combo box. We'll say combo box. Width, we'll say it's like 286 pixels. Its name, so X name, will be CMB flight. I won't worry about the event handler just yet. Let's add our text boxes in. So give a title to each. We'll say text block. Text will be airline. And then below it is text box. X name is TB airline. All right, so that's just the airline. Scroll up a bit. There. Okay, now we need a few more. So I'm going to copy and paste, not going to be retyping it over and over again. So now this one, after airline, will be flight number. And its text box will be TB flight number. All right, after that is TB destination. And text will be destination. And then the last one will be a combo box. So I could just paste it again, but delete the text box. And then we'll have a text block that says aircraft. And this will be a combo box. Again, width 286. And X name is CMB aircraft. Okay. So those are all of our data items, except the grid view. So you can see in our preview there, we have a combo box at the top, we have 3 text boxes, and then a combo box at the bottom, right? And if I pull up SQL Management Studio, because I have it open, show you, one sec. right? So we're not really dealing with ID. We're going to retrieve ID, but we're not going to display it to the user, right? We're going to display airline, flight num, destination, airplane type, right? And so we want to display something like this in the data grid. So we want our data grid to look like this type of output. So now let's define a data grid. So we're going to say under combo box, controls, colon, data grid. We'll give it a name. So we'll say x name equals DG flight view. We'll add a couple of settings here. So we'll say like grid lines visibility is true, or sorry, all, because you want to see some lines between. I mean, you don't have to put lines in if you don't want to, but you could. Auto generate columns is false. Otherwise, what it's going to do is it's just going to take whatever it finds for our data when we retrieve it. It could be all the wrong information. Actually, chances are it'll be the wrong all information, and just display that. Selection mode. We're not going to play with selection mode, but if you wanted to start selecting stuff in there, we'll say single. And there's a couple more settings we could add in, but I think that's good enough. I think that should be okay. I'll leave a couple of spaces in case I have to make any more changes to the settings. But yeah, essentially that. Oh, I missed something. Oh, right. I forgot my closing bracket. That's fine. There we go. Much better. I think. Yep. Still see some errors, but maybe if I build it, it'll go away. So I'll hit run. Just want to verify everything views. Yeah, I think what happened was it just needed a wake up. You can see a line here to signify our basically empty data grid view. Yeah. It just. But I think we'll leave it at this, and we'll jump over to our CS file. And we'll start coding things up here. So the first thing we'll do is we're going to bring in, actually, we'll start by adding a class into this. So I'm going to say public class, and you could probably just do it in a separate file, but I'm going to just keep it in the same one. Flights. And then we'll define our variables. We'll say public int ID, just to shortcut time. Of course, you want to go through having private and public, but for time, say public string airline. And then public string flight num. Public string destination. And finally, public string airplane type. Now let's define some class variables, and they're gonna, not for flights, but for our page. So we're gonna keep this class here. We're gonna move on to our actual flights view class, and we'll write the rest of the code in here. So first I'm going to define SQL connection. It's going to complain because we were missing a using statement. We'll say private SQL connection con equals new SQL connection. Oops. Did not want the arrows. Oops. There. Now we'll let it generate the using for us. It wants system.data.SQL client. So we let it generate the using statement for us. Right. Should be somewhere there. There it is, system data SQL client. And then we can define our connection string. We're going to say private string con string equals, we'll start with an @ symbol, open up some quotes. Now, this is where you're going to need to rely on whatever you have in SQL Management Studio for your server name. So, for example, call it up. So in this window, you can see here I have my server name. So I can just simply copy that. And what I'm going to say is, before I paste it, inside the quotes, I'm going to say data source equals, and then paste it. And put a semicolon. And then for the database, I'm going to specify the database I'm working with. So I'm going to say initial catalog equals, and then my database name. So my database was called prog 32356 flight crew, then semicolon. Let's see if we can do some multiple lines. There's my closing quote. I'm going to put it there, put a semicolon, just get rid of the error. So initial catalog is flight crew. And then username and password. So last class, we used Bob, right? So user, mine is different. Mine is actually Jim Gordon for this database. But last class we created a username Bob and password was Bob, so you would just use that. Semicolon, and then password for this is Batman. But last class we used Bob and Bob, so just go with that. So for my exercise, I'm just going to continue with this. So whatever your username and password was you created last class, go with it. Right. The next class variable we're going to need is a SQL command one. I'm going to say private SQL command cmd. And the reason I'm defining these all as class variables is because we're going to do an insert, update, and delete. And if we just keep on redefining these variable names, that'll be easier just to define as a class variable. Right. And after that, so the next variable we're going to define is a collection that will contain all the flight information so that the DataGrid view can read it. So we're going to say public observable collection. It's not here, it's going to complain. I'll finish the line. Actually, let's see if I can bring, yeah, there it is. So instead of finishing the line, to make it easier, we need system collections object model. So we'll make it happy by saying yes. Now I can continue. It'll be of flights. So flight class we defined above. Call it collection equals new observable collection of flights instantiated. And then finally, we're going to define a list for our aircraft, because we're going to hard code the aircraft options in that second combo box. So we're going to say private list of string aircraft equals new, there it is. We have all of our variables defined. Now the first thing we want to do is we want to set up our combo box, and we also want to set up our DataGrid view. So we want to make a call to the database, retrieve all of the flights that are in the database, and populate the DataGrid view so that when the user loads this page, it's there ready to go. But I'm going to be refreshing the DataGrid view over and over again. So I'm going to put it inside its own separate method called refresh data. So first thing I'll do is below the constructor is say private void refresh data. And I'll make a call to it inside the constructor. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is we'll populate the aircraft combo box. So we'll say aircraft.clear. Because what's going to happen is that every time I refresh this, it's going to continue adding to the aircraft combo box. And then from there, we're going to hard code some aircraft. So we'll say aircraft.add Boeing 777. Then aircraft.add Boeing 787. Then aircraft.add Airbus 330. Aircraft.add Airbus 220. And then aircraft.add Airbus 340. Finally, one more. We'll say aircraft.add Airbus 380. There. And then we'll feed that into the combo box. So we'll say cmd aircraft.item source equals aircraft. Quick run just to test and verify that our combo box works. There, we have all of our aircraft there, so that's good. So now we're going to be populating two objects. We're going to populate the combo box at the top and our data grid.
Why would you want to constantly add the aircraft?
It could go straight into the constructor. You're right.
Okay.
Yeah, I threw it into refresh data, but you're right. It is inefficient. It should probably go into the constructor once and for all. All right. So now let's start work on the data grid view. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clear the data grid view. So dg flight view dot columns dot clear. Because what will happen is that it's going to keep adding columns over and over again as we do refreshes. So we're going to clear all the data. Now we can go ahead and start our connection. So we already defined above, we define a connection string, we instantiate a SQL connection. The next step now is to actually join them together. So we could say con.connection string is equal to con string. Now we're going to create the CMD, the SQL command object. So we're going to instantiate it by saying CMD equals con.create command. Now the rest of the code is going to go inside a try catch finally because anything can go wrong anywhere. So we want to be able to catch any exception that hits. So I'm going to say try. And then I'll put the catch. Exception, call it EX. And then a finally. There. So I got my block there ready to go. So now, let's set where our query. So our query will be string query equals select star from flights. So that's our table name. So if you wrote something different, you want to double check that for the table name. And it seems to know a little too much here, so it's going to say cmd.command text equals query. That's our next line of code. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to open a connection. We're going to do it asynchronously because it'll actually lock up the app when we try and go to the flight page, and you'll sit there waiting for it to download data if something goes wrong. So we're going to say await con.openAsync. And it's going to complain because it will want, or not. Okay, interesting, it didn't complain. It loaded it. I thought it wanted the async call at the top. Oh, it did already. It did it for me. Sometimes it's a little too smart for its own good. Okay, so at this point, it's opened the connection, assuming all went well. Now the next step is to fire off the query. So we're going to need a SQL data reader. It's going to call it reader equals cmd.execute reader. It's going to get back the data. So it'll fire off the query at this point. It'll get back the data. It'll bring it back and put it inside reader. So all the data is there inside reader, but we need it to be in a format that the grid view can understand. All right. So now it's just in a view that the SQL objects understand. So we need to fix that. So we're going to convert it over to a data table by saying data table. And it's not going to like it because we need to do one more import. We need to bring in using system.data. Right. Now we'll say data table with a lowercase d equals new data table. And then we'll say data table, lowercase d, dot load for reader. Okay. at this point, we have the data in a format that we can work with, right? That the data grid view can work with. Now, at this point, in the old way of things, I would have just fished it off to the data grid view and been done, right? Unfortunately, not the case anymore. We have to do our own heavy lifting for formatting and applying this data to the data grid view. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up the columns. So we're going to do a for int I equals 0. I is less than data table, lowercase d, dot columns, dot count, I plus plus. Now we're going to add a new column. So we're going to say dg flight view dot columns dot add, and it'll be like I'm going to put it as multiple lines. So open a round bracket. I'm going to say new data grid column. So data grid text column. It's not going to like this. Probably wants another using statement, which is Microsoft Toolkit UWP UI.controls. Yeah. There. Put a set of round brackets, open up a set of curlies, and put a semicolon at the end over here. And we're going to fill in the blank here. Okay. So within the curlies, we're going to define header equals data table dot columns of I dot column name. Oh, sometimes it does that, yeah. Why is it throwing it there? Oh, comma, not semicolon. All right, and then binding equals new binding, and in curly brackets, path equals new property path, and in round brackets, open a set of quotes, opening square bracket, and then plus I.toString, and then plus a closing square. Making sure, so closing round, closing curly bracket, and there. This is just to put column names at the top of our table.
Is this like making that it tags for like the Java?
Yeah, basically that's what it is. It's making like tags for each column based on like column number, and it's giving it a column name, column title. So now at this point, you would have an empty data table or data grid with no rows, but just column headers. All right, so now we've got something to work with here. Oh, did it? I can wait. All right, so we got the column headings, but we still have to send the data over to the data grid view, and we actually are going to do something else. We're going to do two operations at the same time because we have the combo box as well that we have to feed data into as well. So I'm going to be doing a couple of things. So first off, we're going to convert this over to an observable collection. We'll say var data collection equals new observable collection for just generic objects. So just object. So we're actually going to have two observable collections. This data collection is going to feed into the grid view, and then the collection we defined above was for the combo box. So it's kind of, unfortunately, we couldn't just use one collection between the two because it's just formatted differently, both objects. It wouldn't play nice, unfortunately. This is the only way I could figure out how to get this to work. So I spent a lot of time on the combo box. It just wasn't cooperating until I made a separate collection. So the collection we defined above, because even though it's empty right now, we'll just say collection.clear. Right, so it doesn't keep appending to the combo box. And what we're going to do is we're going to go row by row in our data table and feed them into both collections. So we'll say for each data row, capital D and R, row in data table dot rows, sorry, lowercase data table, lowercase d, dot rows. We're going to instantiate a flight object. So we'll say flights equals new flight. And then we'll just feed all the information. We'll say flights.id is equal to int.parse for row of 0 dot toString. Right. So I'm just going by order. So ID was my first column, airline was my second column, flight num is the third column, destination is the fourth column, and airplane type is the fifth column. So if you have your columns out of order, you want to rearrange these numbers. Let's say flights.airline is equal to row of 1 dot toString flights dot flight num equals row of 2 dot toString flights dot destination equals row of 3 dot toString, and then finally flights dot airplane type equals row of 4 dot toString. And then, so we now have our new flight object. We're just going to apply it to both data collections. So we're going to say collection.add for flights, right? So this flight object goes to that, but the data collection, so the collection talks to the combo box. The data collection talks to the data grid view. It wants it slightly differently. So data collection.add, we'll say row.item array. So it doesn't even care about this flight object we just created. Now we can finally feed it into, so outside of the for each loop, we can finally feed it into both objects. So first off, let's feed it into the data grid. So we'll say dg flight view dot item source is equal to data collection, and Now the combo box. So DataGrid's done. Now the combo box. So CMB flight dot items source is equal to collection. Now with the combo box though, because there's multiple columns, what do we display? So we're going to display the flight num, and whenever somebody selects the flight num, we want to return back the value of the ID, because we're going to use that ID in our select statement, or insert, update and delete, statements, really. So like, because we want to know that row ID, not the flight number, but the row ID. So we'll say CMB flight dot display member path. So we'll specify what to display, which will be data table dot columns of 2 dot column name, which in essence, I'll put a comment here, is flight num. Right, so that's the column name. You don't put the comment in, but if you wanted to, it might help for reasoning purposes.
So you're using column name, not column ID.
Not the ID. No. And then CMB flight dot value, selected value path. Selected value path is equal to data table dot columns of 0 dot column name. And this is basically ID. Right?
Oh, okay. It's displaying the flight num and it's the path.
Yeah. So at this point, we're done the transaction. Right? We just have to do some cleanup, and then we can run this thing. So I'm just going to scroll down. I'll start with the finally. When we're done with the finally, we can clean up. We can say cmd dot dispose and con dot close. So clean up everything that was allocated for the SQL command object and close the connection to the database. Now for catch, we want to save ourselves some debugging issues. Let's print out a message dialog for every error that comes up to save us some time. So I'm going to create a method because handle except it's going to be called over and over again. So I'll just call it handle exception, and then pass in ex. It's going to complain. I'm going to see if it'll just let me auto generate the method def. Otherwise, I'll just define it. Yeah, looks like it did. There it is. We'll make it an async. It's going to want that. There. So we'll say string msg equals ex.message.toString. Let's grab the error message. And we'll just say var dialog equals new message dialog. It's going to complain. See if it'll bring the using in for us. There it is. Windows UI pop-ups. Now we can finish it by passing in MSG. And then await dialog.
Was it pop-ups or was it?
Oh, it was windows.ui.popups. Yeah. Now you have enough to run. And this is what you should see. You should see a scrollable view with some airlines, aircraft working. All right, so we'll have a look at your bugs and then see what the issue is. The combo box should be working as well. It should list out. So this is the output you should be getting.
So this is con, that's connections.
All right, so chances are the first time you run this, you're going to get a message box error. You won't get this output. It'll complain about SQL Viewer not able to view this. And there is two things you have to do. So first, you have to go to services. So you have to open up services. There's actually a few things. So if you run services, look for SQL Server Browser and make sure it's running. It might be disabled. So if I right click on SQL Server Browser and I go to Properties, the first thing I have to do is you have to enable it. So you have to switch it to automatic, right, from disable. That's the first thing you have to do, right? You might be able to hit start from here. Mine's already running.
No.
Or you'll hit OK, I'll hit cancel in my case. You might see start over here, or you might have to go right click and start. But you have to start it. You have to start the SQL Server SQL Server browser process first. That's the first thing you have to do. Yeah.
Can you just go to your code? Was it initial?
All right. Now leave this window open. You're going to need this window momentarily. All right. I'm going to pull it away. All right. So that's the first thing you have to do. The second thing you have to do is go into computer management and enable TCP/IP connections to the database. So you're going to type in, I can't show you my search bar. Maybe I can show it from this bar here. No, it won't let me. But what you're typing in is comp mgmt dot msc.
Is this in service?
In the command bar. So basically you need computer management. I'm going to try computer management and see if it'll bring up the window. Yeah. So,
Run it as administrator?
Yeah, run it as administrator. Okay. So yeah, type in computer management, expand services and applications, expand SQL Server configuration, and expand, getting cut off here, expand SQL Server network configuration, and then you should see protocols for your instance. All right? Yeah, it's all disabled by default. So all three items, enable them. I think shared memory is already enabled. The other two have to be enabled. Both. Yeah, I think you can right click and choose enable for both. All right. That's the second step. The third step is your Windows firewall. Yeah. You have to add it to your Windows firewall. So first I'll give you a moment to make sure that you've enabled these. All right. They really lock down security in Windows 10. Yeah. So this is the second step. So I'm going to pull this away. All right. So third step is Windows Firewall. So the third step is to open Windows Defender Firewall. All right. Windows Defender Firewall. This first option here, allow an app or feature through Windows Defender Firewall. Don't worry, you'll only have to do this the first time on your computer, okay? For these 3 additional steps. So we're gonna hit that, and you're gonna see a whole bunch of processes, all right? Now to be able to change the settings here, you have to go change settings. All right. Now we have to add 2 processes to our firewall. So we're going to go allow another app. All right. And then this dialog box pops up. So we need to add the process for SQL Server and for SQL Server Viewer, the 2 processes there. And that's why I had you guys leave this window open. It was the services. Yes, thank you. So I'm going to bring services over here. We're going to need it. So first, SQL Server. All right. Right click, go back to properties. All right. You're going to copy, I already have it highlighted here, up to here. Don't copy the entire line, not the dash SQL Express, but just the exe with its path. You're going to right click and copy that.
Oh, I do.
Yeah, it's kind of tricky. Be very careful. Yeah, you can probably copy the entire line and then just erase it, erase the extra. Even the quotes you can do. So you're gonna copy that, the path to executable. You're gonna go to browse, and you're gonna paste it into file name, and then just hit open. I already have it done, so I'm not going to hit open. I'm going to hit cancel, but you just hit open. All right. And you hit add.
Oh, wait. Yeah, I don't think you're supposed to search it .exe. You're supposed to search that.
No, you just hit add twice, and it'll do it for you, and it'll actually add it here as well.
Yeah, I want to open it. Wait.
Okay.
Yeah, I searched.
Right, and then you hit add when you're done. Right, you should see it here. Highlight it. You hit add. So I'm going to hit cancel because I already have it added. Now the second one. So I'm going to close off this properties window. Back in services was the same thing, but for SQL Server Browser. I'm going to right click, properties, and just copy this path as well. Copy, allow another app. Browse, and paste. And hit open. And you'll see this one come up. And you'll hit add. All right, now, the beauty of this is you only have to do this the first time. You don't have to worry about this after. Until you buy a new computer. And try doing this again. I'm going to hit cancel because I already have it added. You'll hit add.
Click OK.
And hit OK.
You must close all dialog.
All right, so last thing you need to do in services is click SQL Server and restart the service. Right, so you restart the service, or inside SQL Management Studio, you can right click here and do a restart as well. We have to restart the server to get everything up and running. Now you should see it. So now at this point, you should be able to see this. So let's set up the combo box so that when you choose something, it's going to populate all the other stuff, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to create an event handler for that combo box. So switching over to flightsview.xaml and selecting my combo box CMB flight, going over to properties and generating that event handler. So hit the lightning bolt. And then we're going to look for selected changed or selected item changed. There's only one there, selection changed. Yeah, selection changed. Double click. Selection changed. And I was gonna hit save all, just like don't lose anything by accident. This one will be easy. It's we've already got the data, so we're just gonna parse the data in collection. So first off, this is gonna cause a crash if it's because this thing is executed a little too often, and there are times where we clear the grid, and because it's empty, this gets fired. The selection change gets fired at the same time that the grid's empty, so it causes a crash. So we're only gonna fire it if collection.count is greater than 0. This is just to avoid an error. All right. Now, first thing we'll do is within the combo box. So whatever combo box is chosen, the displayed value is the flight ID, but the hidden value, the selected value, is actually the ID of the row in the table. So we want that ID. So we're going to say int flight ID equals int.parse of CMB flight dot selected value dot toString. Right? So this gives us the flight ID. Now just visually, what that means is, I'm just going to bring over SQL Management Studio. This is what I want. I want the ID number, right? So the combo box displays these as the visual part of it, but the selected value portion is actually when you select one of them, you're actually sending back these, the ID, right? So that can actually work with that. And this is the theme we're working behind for add, update, and for update and delete actually. So now that we have the ID, I'm just going to loop through the entire collection. So I'll say for each flights f in collection, if f.id equals flight ID, then populate the text boxes. So tb airline.text equals f.airline, tb flightnum.text equals f.flightnum, and then tb destination.text equals f.destination. Finally, and this is the nice thing about the combo box, is that I could say cmb aircraft.selected value is equal to f.airplane type. And it'll match it up. And because I found it, I can break out of the loop. Now I can give it a run, choose any of the flights in the first combo box, and you'll see your text boxes populate. Okay, so I'm just going to choose one of them, and you'll see here Japan Airlines populated,
You're screening me for in-flight ID.
WestJet.
Okay.
Now, let's get add working. So, we're going to switch back to flights view. In fact, let's create the event handlers for all of the boxes there. So, app bar button, flat BTN flight add under click.
What? The command line?
Yeah, so switching back to flights view.xaml, I just click on BT, anywhere in the BTN flight add line of code there. We're looking for click under event handlers, and just double click on click.
The app line.
Yeah, it's basically just creating the event handlers for all of those buttons. I'm just going to keep saving as I go. And go back to flights view. Let's do the same for edit. So BTN flight edit. Double click on click. All right, we'll add generate the BTN flight edit click button. All right, and then BTN flight delete. Double click on click. And finally, refresh. So BTN flight refresh. Double click on click. And now you have 4 event handlers to work with. The last one, BTN flight refresh, is easy. You can just put refresh data. Right? You can even add like a little message dialog to it. Right? A var dialog equals new message dialog. Saying, flights have been refreshed. And then await dialog dot show async. Right? So the refresh was easy.
I don't. There's an error.
So if we're in the add event handler, it basically it's assumed the user has already entered some information. So let's retrieve that information from the text boxes. So we'll just say string airline equals tb airline dot text. String flight equals tb flight num dot text. String destination equals tb destination dot text. String airplane equals CMV aircraft dot selected item dot toString.
Mine keeps on like Visual Studio. It's kind of
All right, so first thing we'll do is we're going to check to see if there's any bad input. And really just the bad input I'm checking for is just empty strings, like making sure that no text box is empty. So if airline equals empty string or flight equals empty string or destination equals empty string. Hopefully I spelled it right. Or airplane equals empty string. Just in case if they didn't select anything for the airplane. Then we'll just do their message dialog. So var dialog equals new message dialog, no text box to be empty. And then await dialog dot show dialog, or sorry, show async. There. All right. Else, we want wants an async there for the method call. Now we can go ahead and do an insert. So now we'll just do a con.connection string equals con string. We'll do a cmd equals con.create command. And then the rest go inside a try catch finally. So we'll say try. And I'll come back to try. We'll do a catch. Exception EX. And a catch now is just handle exception EX. And finally, we'll finish at the end. Let's just put the block in. So now we're going to build our query. So we're going to say string query equals, and then insert into, and notice I put the @ symbol at the start of this. So insert into flights, values, and then in round brackets, I'm going to put, again, I'm not doing string joining, we're going to put placeholders for our parameters. So I'm going to put like @new airline, comma, @new flight, comma, @new destination, comma, and @new airplane.
Or you have to specify which variables, because you don't have ID.
Right, you don't need to specify ID because ID is auto increment.
Oh, yeah.
And this is an insert. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So when we do our update, we'll need our ID.
Yeah.
So we're going to need this again, but for ID. Okay. All right. So we have our query. The next step is to put our query inside CMD. So we'll say cmd.commandText is equal to query. But we have to now replace these placeholders. So we're gonna use an object called SQL parameter. I'm gonna call it airParam equals new SQL parameter. And spelling is important. I found out the hard way that a misspelled parameter here and a misspelled parameter here will lead to a lot of pain and suffering in trying to figure out why your code's not working when it looks perfectly correct. So first one is new airline. And second argument is what type is it? So airline is a varchar. So I'm going to say SQL DB type dot varchar. So I've initialized this parameter with the name of the parameter, but I have to pass in the value. So I'm going to say airParam.value is equal to airline. And then I'm going to join this new parameter to my command object. So I'm going to say cmd.parameters dot add for airParam. Yeah. All right, so now we've added this parameter. I'm going to do it 3 more times. I'm just going to copy and paste because I don't feel like retyping it. Because it's basically the same block of code. So the second parameter, I'm going to call it flight param. And it's going to be new flight And so flight param dot value is equal to flight. Check that's the one. Yep, flight. And then add flight param. Now add another block again. This one will be dest param, so destination. So dest param, new SQL parameter, new destination. Dest param dot value is equal to destination. And CMD parameters add dest param.
I'm not sure we got live. We didn't see that. Oh, okay, yeah, I didn't.
All right, one more. This last one, I'm going to call it airplane param. It'll be new airplane. And then airplane param equals airplane. And finally add airplane param. There, so all of my parameters have been added. Okay. All right. So now let's run this thing. So now we're going to say con.open to open the connection, and then cmd.execute scalar. All right, to execute this, and you can put a little message to say, successful. So we could do like a var dialog equals new message dialog, saying new flight added successfully. You're right. I should use non-query. Both actually work.
Yeah.
And both work perfectly. Await dialog dot show async. Yeah, I mean you can use non-query. Both will work. Right. So at this point, the transaction has succeeded. Now, I'm just going to do some cleanup. So our exceptions are handled inside finally. We're just going to clean up by saying cmd.dispose. So clean up all memory allocated from our SQL command object. Close our connections, so con.close. And finally, refresh data to get our data grid view and get our combo box the latest items that were added. And now you have enough to run, add a new airline, or add a new flight, and yeah, let's do a run. right, go to flights. And I have a bunch of flights already, so I'm going to add a new airline. Let's see here. My mind's a blank on an airline. Emirates. It's all around the world. I think there's like EA or something like that. EA like 432. Destination, we'll say, yeah, thank you. And put it, they're always running 380s, so hit A380, hit the plus sign. New flight added successfully. And we'll look here, Emirates is down here, and look at our combo box. We have our new, we can just test our select functionality right there. There you go.
So the update is just